Spider-Man 3 the movie game, one of the most memorable comic book games of all time, for all of the wrong reasons.
Help! Please! Someone! I'm going to die!
Most people who've played this will likely say that it's one of the worst games they've ever had the pleasure of experiencing, and I was one of them. All I could think about when going back and replaying this was all of the not very fond memories of my experience with it, and seeing its reputation in the Spider-Man game community throughout the years didn't help much either. So what did I think after finishing it? I honestly didn't think it was that bad, and I know I practically just signed my death warrant, but let me explain. It's not the worst Spider-Man game, but it certainly isn't great. Why is that exactly? Well, that's what this review is for, now isn't it? I guess I'll start with what you obviously expect from a game, the gameplay. First there's the combat, and already something is off with the dodge mechanic. Remember back in Spider-Man 2 where you had the option to use a spider reflex meter which turned everything around you into slow motion and made dodging attacks a bit easier? Well, it's back, but instead of being an option for the player to use, it's now been merged with the dodge button and is mandatory. This is a problem because you have to always hold down the button, stare at your meter for how long you're able to dodge, and fight off how many enemies all at the same time. Dodging shouldn't be relegated to a meter that you have to constantly worry about using up. It really should be separate from that and just be exactly as it was in Spider-Man 2 and later in the Insomniac games. At least there is a dodge mechanic even if it's not good. Combat is what you expect. You've got your light and heavy attacks that you can mix together with web attacks, and of course, a crap load of combos to learn. Like the first movie game, you'll have to keep going to the combo list on the pause menu every time you want to see a new set that you've unlocked. And because there's so many combos to learn, I basically did the same thing I did back in that first game. I just memorized a few of the best ones and continued from there. There's also a combo meter which fills up when battling enemies. Once it's full and flashing, you can activate 1 out of 4 super attacks. These can really help turn the tide when you're in any sticky situations, wiping out a lot of annoying enemies. This is a neat addition that helps the combat stand out from the previous games a bit more, but in a good way. You can activate your spider sense and use it to locate enemies through solid objects. It's basically the detective vision from the Arkham games, except this came first. Weird. Last but not least, there's the movement, as in running around and swinging from webs. It's fine. It's better than ultimate swinging, but it's fine. The sprint button is back, and I like that it can actually be used as a boost while web swinging, similar to ultimate, except here you're also able to jump from the end of your swing to gain more height. Though unlike ultimate, the mid-air double jump is almost completely useless, while there it was your best friend. You can perform air tricks now, so you can show off how stylish your swinging skills are to yourself. They're here just to make swinging look less boring. I guess they sort of succeeded at that, though later games definitely improved on this mechanic by having you earn points for performing them. Wall running's here. I briefly used it and then forgot that it ever existed. There's not much else to mention, so I'll move on. The game starts off in the middle of a random storyline for the tutorial. You'll learn more about these guys soon enough. After getting bullied by Bruce Campbell and witnessing this, we get our first look at the main cast in all their glory. As you can see, the mission layout has changed yet again, but is still handled decently. Now it's a 3-act structure, with each act having only a few missions available that all have their own storylines. You can then play these in whatever order you choose at certain points in the game. Here's a short example. You'll have the option to beat all these apocalypse missions in the first act, but these arsenic candy ones span over all 3 and can't be 100% completed any sooner. And other stories don't even begin until Act 2 or 3. I like this structure, and it's a shame later games didn't bring it back to try and expand on it, but whatever. Oh, and because this is based off the movie, in case you forgot, each act ends with a mission recreating a fight scene from it. There's quite a few stories to cover, so I'm going to try and give you short plot summaries along with my thoughts in no particular order. Dr. Connors becomes the lizard and hides in the sewers, mutating other citizens into lizards as well. The rumours of his existence summon the return of Kraven the Hunter, who plans to hunt him down. After being transformed into a huge kaiju monster, I'm not even going to attempt to explain that one. He's returned back to normal, and he and Spidey help cure the lizard people. I like that we got to see this version of Connors become the lizard, even if it wasn't in the movies, and seeing him redeem himself afterwards was nice. Overall, great stuff. These three gangs cause trouble around the city, there's a little bit of story between them, and that's about it. The only noteworthy thing to happen is Kingpin appearing, but even his role is small and a complete waste of potential. Now we get to learn the backstory of these guys from the tutorial. Their leader, Luke Carlisle, was a corrupt businessman who was outed by the Daily Bugle. He vows revenge on Jameson and plants bombs all around the city. This all leads to this iconic moment.
Leave it for the bomb squad. Yeah, whatever. From now on, I am the bomb squad.
This is fine. Just fine. Carlisle is an okay villain, and it's cool that he's voiced by Green Goblin from the 90s series, but he doesn't have anything else going for him. Well, aside from his story being very similar to Scorpion's origin from the comics. I like that origin, but with this, it just feels weird. And even weirder because Scorpion's back and his story from the first game has been retconned so that he no longer has any connections to Oscorp or Spider-Man's origin. Now he's a part of Rhino's brief story from the second game and some other evil company that might as well be Oscorp. Despite these changes to his backstory, this is still the same guy we saw back in the first game. Because as it's clear here, these two have met at some point before this, meaning he's been Scorpion for quite some time now. So think of this game's version of him as the same guy but way more pale and without any of the colour that made his design pop so much. After freeing him from his mind-controlled state, Spidey and Scorpion work together to take down Mecha Biocon. What a name. Rhino's defeated and Scorpion learns the truth that he can never be turned back to normal and that he's permanently stuck like this. He then flees the scene. As much as I don't like the changes to his backstory, he's at least got probably the best story in the game, exactly like last time. It has that classic Spidey feel to it, especially in its bittersweet ending, and then these two beating up Rhino together at the end was great to watch, even though the boss wasn't very fun to play. Overall, pretty solid stuff. Spidey and Officer DeWolf work together to expose dirty cops. What else can I say about this one? I like the exchanges between these two, and hey, DeWolf doesn't die by the end, so that's cool. These are side missions that really don't matter. There is one that has Spidey exposing Eddie Brock as a fraud and punching him in the face. That was fun to watch. Eddie's looking pretty angry over what's just happened. He must be yelling his words at the top of his voice. Let's listen.
Oh, you think you're smart, buddy? Well, think again. I hit a bunch of cameras around here, and now I have an even better shot than I was planning. You punching me in the jaw and taking my camera. So thanks.
Okay, that was... Moving on. These are side missions to test both your swinging skills and how well you can hear, because after these are done, you'll be deaf from all of MJ's demands being yelled down your ears.
Swing up real high! Stay as high up as you can! Swing really close to the ground. Go really fast!
Last but not least are stuff related to the movie story, and I'll do this in the right order. The symbiote is introduced and follows Peter back home. Harry becomes the new Goblin and attacks Peter, which leads to him getting injured and never being seen or mentioned again until the end of the game. It seems that even the developers thought him getting amnesia was dumb. Eventually the symbiote bonds with Peter and he's now the black-suited Spider-Man. And he immediately uses it to kill the Sandman despite no mention of him killing Uncle Ben. Say what you will about that retcon in the movie, but at least he had a reason for attempting to kill the guy, but without that context here, it makes it seem like he decided to start killing all of a sudden. So I didn't mention the black suit when talking about the gameplay, because there's not much of a difference there. He's a little faster when swinging, there's some extra animations of him showing off to the player, and a rage meter that you can fill up by rapidly tapping the meter button. It's really all the changes in his personality that show the differences, and they're kinda neat. It's just a shame they didn't do more with that in the gameplay other than the rage meter. They did little stuff, but not much. It seems we're not quite there yet. I do appreciate the added detail in some of the missions with the symbiote's weakness to sound waves being shown. It's a nice bit of setup for later on. Peter has had enough of being MJ's taxi service, so he makes it his objective on this last one to scare and rant about her as much as he can. This causes him to snap out of it, and so he removes the suit. And you all know where this is going. Eddie just so happens to be around the corner and follows him into the church. The symbiote bonds with him and they become Venom. Eddie tracks down the Sandman and blackmails him into helping him kill Spider-Man, otherwise he'll kill his daughter, who was never mentioned up until now. Believe it or not, this scene is actually better than the movie version, because there Venom just simply asked if he wanted to help him and Sandman was like,
Yeah.
Whilst here he doesn't want to kill anyone, which forces Venom to threaten his daughter's life so that he has no other choice. When this game handles a scene better than the movie, you know something's wrong, especially this scene, because looking at it out of context and with no audio is hilarious. They capture MJ, surprise, surprise, to lure Spidey into their trap. Luckily, Harry's back in the plot and arrives to help out, only to then die. Venom dies in surprisingly brutal fashion. Sandman reunites with his daughter, and credits. That was a lot of story to summarise. Thank God I didn't do it like last time, otherwise I wouldn't even be halfway by now. One last thing about this story worth mentioning is the voice cast. I'm surprised with how many actors they got from the movie to reprise their roles for this game. It sure is a shame that most of them were not great. Except for JK, he's always great as Jameson. There's a lot of bosses and quite a few don't have much going for them, so I'm not going to cover every single one. This one has a rocky beginning, starting off with lots of QTEs, but once that's over, it becomes quite decent, because you're then able to freely swing around the city and fight him however and wherever you want. I fought him at the top of the Empire State Building for a bit. That was great. This makes perfect sense for a boss in a Spider-Man game, especially if he can fly. I'm surprised that no other game in the series took this idea and improved on it. It's a huge shame because a boss like this should work, and I'm honestly not sure if I actually like this boss or just the idea of it. I actually had quite a bit of fun with this one, as it's different from the other bosses because of how it solely relies on Spider-Man using his wits instead of his fists, which I can't say for the previous bosses as much. I mean, he only uses them to trick the boss into firing a missile for him to counter back with the whole time, but it's still cool that that detail was in here. The best part of this by far is Jameson hiding in the background and commenting on your progress exactly how you would expect him to.
Spider Loser is going to be the headline tomorrow.
So despite this being the first time you ever wear the black suit, it's a bit underwhelming. Sandman is still a decent challenge, but the first fight that you're in with this suit should leave you with a much stronger feeling, like you've earned this big boost of power. Though a big highlight of this fight is how it utilizes the oncoming trains as a heads up for you to make a choice. Either make sure you're out of the way or trick Sandman into getting hit, therefore risking yourself to get hit and possibly losing a fair chunk of health. I like how they did this. It adds a bit more tension to an otherwise okay fight. This is probably one of the more challenging bosses. He'll drink a few potions in order for this to be a fair fight. With each sip of one, there's a different method of fighting him. There's also the backstory of Spidey defeating Kraven back in the first game, adding a nice bit of continuity between them, which is something that I've always loved about these games. This sure sounds like a great boss, and for some reason I don't like it. Maybe it's the execution or the gameplay, but I honestly couldn't tell you why I feel this way towards it. I figured it out, it's Kraven's awful mustache, that's why. Seriously, what is that? So the leader of the Dragon Tail is a pretty easy boss. Maybe a little too easy. In fact, his henchmen who you have to fight right before him are more of a challenge. Now that's sad. There is one major thing they all have in common aside from constantly blocking your attacks. They'll all stand around and do nothing if you decide to hide on the upper level. I hid up here so I could quietly fill up the rage meter since it's the best way to deal with these guys. And all of them can teleport at will, by the way. Aside from that, this boss is very forgettable. Now Kingpin over here is the exact opposite, and I think he's the hardest boss of the entire game. He'll constantly block your attacks and counter back with a lot of damage. You really need to be careful when dealing with this one. If you're not, you will die very quickly. All else I can say is once that rage meter is full, don't hold back and unload everything on him. This final mission is exactly how I remembered it. That being, it sucks. In all seriousness, it's really the giant Sandman boss that isn't good, despite the fact that you play as a different character and are fighting a literal giant. All you do is slowly move left and right to avoid his attacks, slowly throw pumpkin bombs at him as it slowly depletes his health, until eventually, quick time event galore. And if you fail these too many times, you'll have to restart the entire fight. I found this boss simply just boring. The only time when it wasn't was when QTEs appeared, but that's only because I was more annoyed than anything. Venom is surprisingly easy. Actually, I'm certain he's easier than Kingpin. Of all the bosses to be easier than Kingpin, why is Venom one of them? He's been set up throughout the entire game, has some of Spider-Man's abilities, and even shares the final boss slot with Sandman. And he's not even that challenging. The closest he gets to being somewhat of a threat is when he activates his rage meter, which forces you to stun him with loud noises. That and not having you just be stuck in one little place the whole time makes this the slightly better fight. Slightly. Also, his death being as brutal as it is worth a point. So as you could see, most of the bosses weren't the best. Some of them had interesting ideas but didn't execute them quite right, and others were just bland. Hopefully the next game will notice these mistakes and improve them. Like the previous games, the soundtrack continues to be a highlight. It's not on the level of the first movie game or Ultimate, but it's still pretty good. That and the Spider-Man 2 game soundtrack are definitely worth listening to. There are quite a few things to keep you occupied in the open world, like returning stuff that don't require much explaining. You know, some form of tokens or collectibles, races, combat tours, and random city crimes. Then there's the newly added bomb and skydiving tours. The bomb tours are exactly as they were in the Mad Bomber missions, but a lot more difficult. Prepare to be possibly stressed out when playing through these. The skydiving tours are all about precision and timing. Clearly, I didn't get the memo because I failed at these miserably and multiple times. If you're good at or a fan of these type of missions, you'll probably have more fun than I did. You can also travel faster around the city by locating one of these slingshot points and then using it to propel yourself forward into the sky. Cool. After you beat the final mission, you're then able to wear the black suit and replay the entire game from start to finish. It's basically New Game Plus. I'm glad they put this in here because there's not really any other bonus content that is in the Xbox 360 version. Console exclusive content. My favourite. So the PS3 version got a collector's edition that came packaged with a decent, but not a lot, amount of content. This ranged from behind the scenes footage and trailers for the movie to even an exclusive playable character for roaming around the city, the New Goblin. Even with this collector's edition, there's still not much in it. The one interesting part of it is the New Goblin, as he was originally intended on being fully playable in the open world on other versions as well. I only recently discovered how much content was removed from this game, and there was a lot. New Goblin had his own missions and races. There was a new free-flow combat system that involved Spider-Man being creative with his powers, which anticipated what the Arkham series would do and be most famous for. Black Cat would have returned alongside her story-centered missions. There was a boss fight between Spider-Man and Giant Sandman, which was even shown in one of the trailers. Character models were made to look as close to the actors as possible, with some new added features to the graphics that couldn't be properly done at the time due to hardware limitations, which resulted in what we got. At least Spider-Man's model, weird alien head aside, turned out to be the best model of all the characters from the movie. Others that are just in the game, such as Lizard, do look pretty solid though. A boss fight with New Goblin in the black suit, the ability to switch between red and black suits on the spot, gang bases and Lizard hideouts, a nice stylish menu layout. The list goes on. Treyarch really intended for this to be the biggest and most expansive Spider-Man game yet, but due to being a movie tie-in and under the watchful eye of Activision, they had to put out a game that wasn't even close to what they wanted to release. Which is a huge bummer because this could have been on par with the previous games and might have possibly even surpassed them. And on that note, I think it's about time that I wrap this up.
Spider-Man 3 is not one of the best games in the series, but I wouldn't call it the worst either. It's definitely got a handful of problems, but it does have good stuff sprinkled in here and there behind some not so good stuff. And if we'd gotten the intended version of this, I think it would have been a pretty solid entry in this series. So I'm gonna give Spider-Man 3 the movie game a 6 out of 10. Thanks for watching, and here's a little tease for the Spider-Man Web of Shadows review. See you guys.